Steven Curtis Chapman is the most awarded artist in Christian music with 58 Dove Awards, 5 Grammys, and 48 #1 singles. I am so thrilled to sit down with you today. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It's great to be with you. Always good to be back with my Canadian friends on 100 Huntley Street. So thanks for having me.
We love having you. Okay. Now, you've just released a new release, Deeper Roots. It's a Bluegrass album. Tell me about revisiting these roots.
Well, I did that. They are my deepest roots, bluegrass music. The earliest memories I have as a little boy growing up in Kentucky, which is, of course, the home of bluegrass music for anybody that really knows much about bluegrass. I think they consider the birthplace to be not far from where I live, because that's where Bill Monroe comes from, and he's kind of known as the father of bluegrass music. But I grew up with that sound. That's the earliest memories I have, are my dad playing guitar. His best friend on one side was Scotty Henson, a 5-string banjo player. His other friend on the other side was Jack Curtis Martin, where my Curtis name comes from, was a great dobro player who would go on to play with legendary Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs on the Grand Ole Opry. So there was a lot of really rich, great music in my earliest childhood. And my dad, who is still a great guitar player and a great singer, he taught me to play guitar when I was 6 years old. I learned my first song on the guitar. And so I grew up just so much, a fan of all music, but that music is, again, kind of the deepest in my DNA. And when I started, really when my family and I together, around the time that I was 7 years old, my mom and dad and older brother really began to follow the Lord, and their faith journey began at that point. Mine was just a few months after kind of watching this transformation in my home. We started to play music together as a family. We started singing in church. And at that point, we'd take the hymns and we'd take those old songs, but they always kind of had a little bit of a Kentucky sort of spin on them. A lot of harmonies and, playing, they were always on guitar, and my dad would sort of convert them into songs that we could, play in church just with the upright bass and 2 guitars. So I've always wanted to do a recording that would really honor kind of those deepest roots. And so I got to have my dad sing on this album. He's almost 80 years old. Got to have my brothers sing with me. I had Ricky Skaggs. If you can't do a bluegrass album without the bluegrass king, Ricky Skaggs, who's a dear friend, an amazing man, came and sang on a remake of a familiar song of mine, Dive. We did a bluegrass version of Dive, which is so much fun. My son sang on the record with me, my daughter-in-law. So it was really a family affair, and just so special. I got to sing some of the old hymns I grew up singing, got to sing a few new songs that I've written, and just very, very special.
Yeah, and you mentioned your dad singing on it. That last track, I'd Rather Have Jesus. Tell me what that means to your dad.
Oh, yeah. Well, that song was sung at my grandmother's funeral, my dad's mom, who raised my dad and his brother alone. My dad's father was not in the picture, left home when my dad was 3 and died a few years after. So my grandmother just is such a powerful presence in our family, and loved Jesus, and was a praying grandma. And so when she passed, we sang that at her funeral. It was one of her favorite old, gospel songs, and as a result, one of my dad's. But the words are also so significant, because the words talk about how I'd rather have Jesus than wealth or fame. And my dad, who had been pursuing a career in music, in country music and folk music, when he really gave his life to the Lord, he laid that dream down, because he knew it would mean he wouldn't be able to be there for his sons and be involved in his family. And so the reason I have a love for music and a relationship with Jesus is much due to my dad making the decision to lay that dream down, and kind of that sacrifice of that. But then to be able to sing that with his sons, and actually end up singing on the Grand Ole Opry and doing a lot of really amazing things together with my dad, has really been special. And that song kind of sums all of that up. So we put it at the end of the album. I told my dad I wanted him to sing it, and he said, "Son, I don't think I can get through that, because I cry when I try to sing that song." And so it took us about 12 takes. Those that were in the studio, remember, because we had cameras rolling and everything, and he'd get one line out. He'd sing, "I'd rather have Jesus." Then his head would go down. He'd just get real quiet. And he'd look up, and he'd have tears. And he'd say, "I just don't know if I can get through this one. It's just, it's so powerful." And then I say, "Dad, it's okay. We'll try again. If you can't, it's all right. But do you want to try it again?" "Yeah, I'll try it again." He'd get another line out, and then he'd put his head down. But we finally got through the song, and it's really, really special for me. If if the whole record was just for me to have my dad singing that song, because I know he won't be with us forever. I mean, he's 80 years old. He's already had some health issues, so very, very special.
What a great memory.
Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciate about you is that you've just been so authentic. Your book, Heaven in the Real World, you really unpacked a lot about your life. Mm-hmm. One thing you talked about is your relationship with your wife and how you guys at different times, it's not been easy. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about your marriage and what you've kind of learned through that.
Well, we have learned that we are both married to sinners. Her married to the bigger one. Let me just go ahead and clarify that in case she sees this. More the more broken one. But no, that we are, we, like many couples, we started out thinking, gosh, we're just so in love. This is going to be so easy, and it's going to be just wonderful. And very quickly, as all couples do, you begin to realize now that we're in, now that we've made a covenant, we've made this vow, and there's, if you ever doubted if there's, good and evil, and there's, there's an enemy, and that we don't war against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. If you ever wondered, is that just words, or really, get married, and you realize that the thing that represents the closest thing that represents, our relationship with God, marriage, the reason why it was instituted by God is this is our relationship, the bride of Christ, and our, covenant relationship with Him. Marriage is the whole reason, God invented it, is it represents that relationship. And so, of course, it's going to be attacked, and of course, it's going to be a challenge. And yet, it's also going to be, I love the way Tim Keller says it, I really think God's idea, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing or whatever, but I'm pretty sure God's idea of marriage isn't so much to make us happy as it is to make us holy. Mm-hmm. And it really is so true that when I think about my relationship with my bride, Mary Beth, for these 34, going on 35 years, there have been some amazingly happy, wonderful moments, but there have been some really, really hard moments, and still are. Even after 34 years, I figured by now, surely we would have it figured out. But we're still learning, we're still broken, but we're still experiencing what we can only experience. And when I think about the understanding of God's grace and God's goodness and His faithfulness, it's so much more real to me now, after 34 years of marriage, walking through the hard things, walking through the dark places. It's so worth it, when you stay in that, and then you get to a place and you see, wow, I would have never known this, about us and about myself and about just the goodness of this had we not continued on this journey. So we're still learning.
And you're not alone. So for people watching,
yes,
and for everyone watching who's married pretty much,
yes,
right? What encouragement could you give them just about how to stick it out in those hard times?
Yeah. I was actually writing a song the other day, and I wrote this lyric. I was standing on the side of a river, and I was watching this river flow, and I was thinking about marriage, and I said, the river will rise and it will fall, but it keeps running through it all. And if we'll just stay in it, then I really believe it will lead us, it'll take us to some better place, and it's so hard at times. And I know there's so much brokenness, and there are reasons, that people need to really, be apart if if it's threatening and things, so there's always so much to consider in that. But I just think there's such a tendency. It seems like in so many times this is so hard, and there's so many voices telling us that, gosh, nothing should be this hard. You're supposed to be happy, and even God wants you to be happy, and ultimately He does. But that His version of happiness for us, true joy, sometimes takes us through some very dark places, and that's where we experience Him. And so I would just encourage others to just keep trusting God. There's so much about just trusting Him and knowing that right now, I wrote the song, I Will Be Here, for Mary Beth for that very reason. It's like if we wake up and we have no idea where we are, where the sun doesn't appear, and I want to be here, because I believe that's where God shows up and does things that He can only do in our hearts through those times.
One of my favorite verses, weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. There's always another season ahead.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know a lot of people are going to be encouraged just by hearing your heart.
Thank you. Bless you.